Stop panicking. Shh, stop panicking. Calm down. Do you see any Germans? Right, then take it easy. Go play in the mud or something. Yeah? There have been serious political machinations and intrigues within the Japanese high command all year, as factions vie for war and for peace. And this week, the Japanese government falls. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Operation Typhoon, Germany's drive on Moscow, continued, creating two encirclements of hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers. The Germans also advanced in the south, and in North Africa, the British made plans for a future offensive. The Moscow Panic begins this week on the 15th. It starts when Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov warns the American and British embassies that they need to get ready for evacuation to Kuibyshev, 800 kilometers to the east. John Erickson writes, "The real crisis, however, spilled onto the streets and into plants and offices. A spontaneous popular flight added itself to the hurried and limited evacuation, accompanied by a breakdown in public and party disciplines. There was a rush to the railway stations. Officials used their cars to get to the east. Offices and factories were disabled by desertions. They mine the railway tracks and the bridges, and orders are issued to blow everything at the first sign of the enemy." But in spite of this, Georgy Zhukov has mobilized the city, and for the past week, 250,000 Muscovites, nearly 200,000 of them women, have been building defenses and digging anti-tank ditches, and many continue to do so, panic or no panic. But how justified is that panic? For days, German papers have been blaring the news that the end of the war has come. But by October 11th, Josef Goebbels knew he had a serious problem. What he has to do now is explain to the German people how the war could still carry on, even though being supposedly decided. Stahl also points out that American journalist Howard Smith in Berlin says that now really comes the breaking point for many people in terms of trusting their government's accurate reporting of the war. The Reich's press chief, Dr. Otto Dietrich, had made a major appearance before the world press on the 9th, proclaiming victory. But German newspaper sales drop after Dietrich's speech, and the amount of people caught listening to radio broadcasts from abroad, like from London and Moscow, triples. Smith says, "From now on, a wall of distrust separated the ministry of Dr. Goebbels from his people. The shepherd boy had hollered wolf once too often." Goebbels' diary says, "Admittedly, we are to bear the greatest part of the responsibility for this. Our victory news is no longer accepted with the required attention and necessary importance." Among the troops at the front, many of those dragging vehicles through the mud and snow in sub-zero temperatures take issue with the Reich's claims of victory, some even mocking them, while many others convince themselves that the government knows better than they do, and a real polarization develops. Oh yes, snow and ice. Right. October 14th, the temperature in the central battle zone drops to below freezing. The 15th, an SS regimental diary records 10 inches of snow. Throughout the Eastern Front, a mixture of melting snow flurries and heavy rains had created a thick, glutinous mud which slowed down and could even halt the advance of the German tanks. It was a mud which the Soviet T-34 tanks, with their wider tread, were better designed to overcome. The 16th, a pilot arrives in Rastenburg with the news that 6 inches of snow cover the whole Russian countryside. Deputy Chief of Staff of the Luftwaffe, Hoffmann von Faldau, writes, "Our wildest dreams have been washed out by rain and snow." But they are still beating the Soviets pretty spectacularly. Even though the Soviets fight hard to break out of the Vyazma pocket as the week gets going, it contracts smaller and smaller. Day after day, Soviet POWs are being rounded up by the tens of thousands, though all the while breakout attempts savage German units, and countless men escape into the woods around the region. German intelligence says that the road to Moscow is open, with only militias to defend it. But Army Group Commander Fedor von Bock has more problems than you might think, and it isn't just straightforward. I mean, sure, those armies are trapped in the pockets, but that doesn't mean they're beaten. And beating them is going to give Georgy Zhukov time to beef up Moscow's defenses, as is the worsening weather, which makes many roads impassable. Stavka is organizing and reorganizing its forces all week. During the week, Ivan Konev, Zhukov's deputy, is put in charge of the newly designated Kalinin Front, made from consolidating other fronts and adding new armies. The 16th, 5th, 43rd, and 49th defend against Gunther von Kluge's advancing 4th Army. What are all the panzers doing? Well, we looked last week at their new objectives, and they're kind of far-flung. Right now, only 2 of the 8 Panzer Corps in Army Group Center, Kunstens and Schweppenbergs, are trying to actually advance on Moscow. And since they are road-bound, since supplies cannot reach them when they go cross-country, they can't use superior numbers for flanking attacks. And small Soviet battle groups with armor and artillery on just the roads, meeting them head-on, can seriously delay them. This is even more devastating when the Soviets send the T-34s, which handle the weather and terrain better than the German tanks, around the flanks to hit them from behind. While Kunsten and Schweppenberg made some progress in the second week of October, their forces were clearly inadequate to crack the Moscow defensive perimeter, let alone encircle the Soviet capital. As Army Group Center's bulk wallowed in the mud and struggled to maintain itself in the absence of supplies, a general advance could not be conducted, and certainly not rapidly. This was precisely what Zhukov needed. And German High Command insists on other panzer spearheads heading towards distant flanks. Kempf's Panzer Corps even has different orders from Guderian and OKH. But it doesn't matter, because as its diary notes the 12th, the divisions are all completely fixed in the mud. That day, they are hit hard by a Soviet counterattack, and a lot of their vehicles really are just sitting ducks. At the other end of the operation, Reinhardt's Panzer Corps has been sent towards Kalinin, and they have orders to save fuel by leaving all vehicles not essential for active combat behind and siphoning all of their fuel. They reach Zubtsov the 11th. On the 12th, Kruger's 1st Panzer Division takes Staritsa, 45 kilometers to the northeast. He continues to Kalinin that night, with the bizarre result that German tanks advance right through the middle of fleeing Red Army troops. Heinz Fausten recalls, "We dashed on through scenes of total disorder. Red Army commanders swore at us from their vehicles, believing we were Russians fleeing from the front. Enemy vehicles cut into our column, joined us for a while, and then, realizing our identity, swerved off again." Still, Kruger rolls into Kalinin the morning of the 13th. On the 14th, Bach announces, "The Battle of Vyazma is over." It has not achieved, as the other battles have also failed to achieve, a knockout blow or the collapse of Soviet resistance. It is a truly impressive feat, though. The Soviets had 1.25 million men, more or less, on October 2nd in 3 fronts on the approaches to Moscow. 2 weeks later, between Vyazma and Bryansk, roughly 1 million men of those men have been killed or captured. Germany claims a total of 673,098 prisoners of war. But it also drives home the question to the average German soldier, just how big is the Red Army? Because they're still not beaten. Army Group Center's losses have been way lighter, 48,000 in the first half of October, but add that to the 229,000 lost up to October 1st, and it's well over 250,000 men. They only got replacements for a bit more than half that, and the reserves of the replacement army have now run dry. And the spectacular scale of the German victory of the Twin Battles is already beginning to be transformed in Soviet eyes, much as Dunkirk was last year for the British. Much as the British lost a battle to save an army, the Soviets lost a bunch of armies to save Moscow. Well, that is how many of them see it. Is that far-fetched? Is Vyazma a great German victory, or is it the first bulwark of defending Moscow? Well, either way, Operation Typhoon is not about Vyazma. As Stahel says, the German High Command was aiming for more wide-ranging objectives, which in mid-October was still a long way from being achieved. In mid-October 1941, the Wehrmacht was not at the precipice of victory. Moscow was not about to fall, and the Soviet Union's ability to go on waging war extended far beyond the weakened forces positioned around Moscow. The Battle of Vyazma was over, but Hitler's drive on Moscow had only cleared its first hurdle. There is also this as a boon for Stalin, since the Soviet spy Richard Sorge tells him the 15th that the Japanese will definitely not attack the Soviet frontier in the east until at least the spring of 1942. Stalin orders half of the divisional strength of the Far East to head west to fight the Germans and hold Moscow. That's more than 8 divisions with 1,000 tanks and 1,000 planes. And the German Fourth Army is trying to advance. The panzer groups are all trying to advance, but the second half of the week's movement is at a crawl if there is any movement whatsoever. The mud for now has set in. And here are some notes to end the week. The Soviet troops' evacuation from Odessa finishes. On the 15th, 30 transports leave with 35,000 men for Sevastopol. Even before this, though, 192 ships had removed 86,000 men, 1,000 trucks, and 400 big guns. On the 17th, the USS Kearney is torpedoed by a German U-boat. 11 sailors die. They are the first American casualties of the war. You can learn more about that on our Instagram day-by-day coverage. And former French Prime Ministers Daladier, Reynaud, and Blum are all arrested this week on Philippe Pétain's orders, charged with being responsible for France's defeat. And the week ends, along with much of the forward movement of the Germans, though they achieved 2 spectacular victories this week. And, there was something about a new Japanese government. See, as we saw in late July, Japan occupied southern Indochina, and the US responded by freezing Japanese assets and tightening the economic screws of embargo. Japan needs imports like oil and rubber, and a lot of their government was more than willing to go to war in Southeast Asia to get them. War with Britain, war with the Netherlands, and it's possible that the US would get involved too. On September 3rd, at the Liaison Conference, it was agreed that Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoye would continue to seek peace with American President Franklin Roosevelt. But it would be war if that didn't come about by mid-October. As for Emperor Hirohito, Konoye told him September 5th that changing emphasis from war to negotiation would be politically impossible. The next day, Hirohito approved the cabinet's war decision at an imperial conference, after assurances that war was only a backup plan in case of diplomatic failure. The cabinet at that time was working hard to make that failure a reality. Well, that's one version. Germany in the Second World War says that Hirohito got involved in the debate the 5th and summoned all the military leaders. General Sugiyama, Army Chief of Staff, said a Pacific War with the United States would last no more than 3 months. Hirohito was skeptical since Sugiyama, as Army Minister in 1937, had said the China incident would be over in a month, and it was now a 4-year war with no end in sight. Admiral Nagano, Navy Chief of Staff, then compared Japan to a very sick person who would die without surgery but could survive through a dangerous operation. Both of them did, however, tell the emperor that they favored a diplomatic solution. This was a lie. On September 25th, at the Liaison Conference, Army Minister Hideki Tojo tried to get the cabinet to commit to the date of October 15th for war in Southeast Asia. Konoye considered resignation after this meeting, but did not go through with it. Konoye had proposed a summit with Roosevelt already in August, as we saw, but it had been so far rejected, mainly because FDR thought any agreements Konoye made, he would be unable to force the Imperial Japanese Army and Imperial Japanese Navy to keep. On October 2nd, American Secretary of State Cordell Hull said the precondition for any summit was Japan showing they would pull troops out of Indochina and China. Konoye met with Tojo twice soon after to try to convince him of a troop withdrawal, but this failed. This week on the 12th, Konoye meets with Tojo, Foreign Minister Toyoda, and Navy Minister Oikawa in what will be called the Tekigaiso Conference. Konoye says straight out he does not have confidence in a war and will not lead it. He still does not take the lead, though, in demanding that war be taken away as an option. Toyota declares that the September Imperial Conference was a mistake. And if they agree on that, then war is off the table. But Tojo says an imperial resolution cannot be violated, and Hirohito had made such a resolution. On the 14th, Konoye meets Tojo once again to try to convince him to not go to war and to consider withdrawing troops from Indochina. Tojo says any troop withdrawals are out of the question. A cabinet meeting follows, where Tojo takes the stage, saying the imperial decision was thoroughly debated before being taken. The imperial edict had said negotiations must bear fruit by early October. They had not done so, and hundreds of thousands of troops are now heading south. So, what's the problem? After the meeting, Tojo goes to the keeper of the Privy Seal to push for Konoye's resignation. That evening, Tojo sends Konoye a message through Teiichi Suzuki asking him to resign, and saying if he does, then Tojo will endorse Prince Higashikuni as next prime minister. Now, Suzuki's the head of the cabinet planning board, and he tells Konoye that Tojo thinks the whole cabinet must resign and take the blame for wrongfully calling for the imperial edict, and that only someone with Higashikuni's imperial background can void it, okay? The 15th, Konoye recommends Higashikuni for prime minister to Emperor Hirohito, and on the 16th, Konoye resigns. On October 18th, 1941, tomorrow, Emperor Hirohito appoints as Prime Minister of Japan, General Tojo Hideki.